explore the remarkable life of Leonard "Red" Kelly, the Simcoe, Ontario farm boy who became an NHL icon. Born in 1927, Kelly's journey from frozen ponds to hockey stardom is a tale of grit and grace. A defenseman turned forward, he redefined versatility, winning 8 Stanley Cups, 4 with Detroit, 4 with Toronto, including the Maple Leafs' last in 1967. His 1954 Norris Trophy set the standard for defensemen, while 3 Lady Byng Trophies showcased his sportsmanship. At 33, Kelly's bold switch to center sparked Toronto's dynasty, earning 70 points in a season. Beyond hockey, he served as a Canadian Parliament member, balancing politics with playoff heroics. Kelly's legacy endures in his mentorship of stars like Frank Mahovlich and his quiet support for mental health initiatives. Discover how this humble innovator, with 1,316 games and 823 points, left an indelible mark on hockey, embodying decency and excellence. They used to say you could follow the glow of Leonard Patrick "Red" Kelly's hair across a rink the way ancient mariners chased a lighthouse. But anyone who watched him knew the real beacon was the man himself, an unassuming farm boy from Simcoe, Ontario, who would quietly sculpt one of the most astonishing careers in hockey history. He was born on July 9, 1927, the middle of 5 children growing up amid tobacco rows and frozen ponds that stiffened under the long Canadian winters. On those ponds, his father, Thomas, swapped a puck for a tennis ball so his red-headed son learned to cradle rubber as gently as silk. At night, after chores, Red fell asleep clutching clippings of Maple Leaf great Ted Kennedy, memorizing every stride. The dream that flickered in the lantern light above his bunk, playing in the National Hockey League, seemed far-fetched for a boy who milked cows at dawn. Yet it simmered, stubborn, impossible to stamp out. When Kelly enrolled at Toronto's St. Michael's College in 1944, he lugged trunks stuffed with farm clothes, Latin textbooks, and a work ethic so rugged it impressed priests and coaches alike. 3 winters later, he captained St. Mike's to the Memorial Cup final and piled up 33 points in 30 games, numbers that turned heads far beyond the Catholic school's ivy walls. Leafs scouts loitered around the arena entrance, but, in a twist that still makes Toronto fans wince, Detroit's chief scout Carson Cooper slipped past them, shook the young man's calloused hand, and delivered a crisp contract. Red skipped the minors altogether. No riding bus routes through the back roads like Johnny Bower, no dozen-year apprenticeship like Glenn Hall, and at 20 skated straight into the Red Wings lineup in the autumn of 1947. Imagine the original Six Era's industrial roar, the organ pumping, smoke coiling beneath the rafters, Gordie Howe cracking opponents like timber, Maurice Richard swirling in a flare of fury. Into that cauldron stepped Kelly, a 20-year-old defenseman facing men who shaved with straight razors and treated the slot like no man's land. He skated with a grace that startled them, an OHA kid gliding past veterans who had muscle memories older than he was. Bill Quackenbush mentored him, the pair functioning almost telepathically. By the spring of 1950, Red was lugging the puck out of danger, banking breakouts off the end boards, and, in Game 7 against New York, hoisting his first Stanley Cup. Detroit fans whooped themselves hoarse, but Kelly's celebration was as understated as a wink. He had blocked more shots than he took, and the purple bruise blooming beneath his ribcage reminded him that one win meant nothing without humility. Over the next decade, he stitched together a resume that forced record keepers to widen their ledgers. 3 Lady Byng Trophies, awarded for gentlemanly play, glittered on his mantle like tame lions. One in a league where Billy Smith prowled the crease-swinging lumber, and Tim Horton's tree-trunk wrists sent foes cartwheeling. In 1954, the NHL introduced a new prize, the Norris Trophy for top defenseman, and Kelly's inaugural victory set the standard that future greats like Chris Chelios would chase. He collected 4 Stanley Cups with Detroit, weathered the Maurice Richard riot in 1955, when tensions between French and English Canada boiled over into broken glass and smoldering police cars, and lined up across from the Rocket himself in the cooled-off aftermath, remarking that Richard looked like a storm that still had lightning to spare. Through it all, Kelly kept his penalty minutes low enough to read as a misprint, 208 in 13 seasons, barely a quarter of what hulking contemporaries racked up in brawls that sometimes cracked visors and sometimes broke hearts, like the fatal blow delivered to Brian Spencer's father by an RCMP bullet years later. Yet the most audacious chapter of Red Kelly's saga began not with a triumphant cheer, but with a whispered rumor. By 1960, Detroit's volcanic general manager Jack Adams considered his stalwart blue liner expendable. Adams tried to trade him to the New York Rangers. Kelly refused, calling the deal a betrayal of loyalty. The standoff might have ended a fine career had Punch Imlach of the Toronto Maple Leafs not dialed a clandestine number and offered Kelly something wild, a second life, not on defense, but as a forward. Changing positions after 13 seasons sounded as reckless as asking a concert pianist to switch to drums midway through Beethoven's Fifth. Yet, Kelly accepted. On February 10th, 1960, he became a Maple Leaf, and the hockey world gasped as Toronto's crest covered Detroit's winged wheel on his chest. Reinventing himself at 33, he centered Frank Mahovlich and Bob Nevin with such wizardry that sports writers scribbled furiously just to keep pace. In his first full Toronto campaign, he erupted for 70 points in 64 games. Shotgun wedding numbers for a convert playing a new position. And when spring thawed the streets of downtown Toronto in 1962, Kelly lifted the Stanley Cup again, this time in royal blue, igniting a dynasty that would claim 4 championships in 6 seasons. The 1967 triumph, secured in 6 games over Montreal, still flickers through old television snow as the Maple Leafs' last taste of ultimate glory. In the decisive game, Kelly, at 39, recorded 3 assists, threading passes through legs and over sticks as though his blade were a seamstress's needle. Beside him stood aging netminder Johnny Bower, reliable rock Tim Horton, and young winger Ron Ellis, all beneficiaries of Kelly's calm, professorial leadership. Off the ice, his life was as carefully balanced as a puck on its edge. In 1962, while driving to practice one fall morning, he spotted lawn signs bearing his own name. Someone had nominated him to run for Parliament. Most players would have laughed and headed for pre-game steak, but Kelly visited campaign headquarters on his lunch break, shrugged, and said, "Why not?" That June, he became Liberal Member of Parliament for York West. Weekdays saw him study briefs on federal budgets, and nights found him back-checking against Boston's uke line. On one surreal February day, he rose in the House of Commons to debate agricultural subsidies, then hopped a flight, slid into his gear at Maple Leaf Gardens with minutes to spare, and helped defeat the Chicago Blackhawks in overtime. The dual existence made him something between Clark Kent and a Canadian Frank Capra hero, proving that athletes could influence more than box scores. Red retired from playing in the summer of 1967, his 8th cup tucked neatly beside the others, and then wandered restlessly into coaching. First came the expansion Los Angeles Kings, a sun-soaked experiment where players sweated in practice and lounged poolside reading Variety. Kelly's gentle insistence on hard skating clashed with California's new age vibe, so after 2 seasons he headed to Pittsburgh, molding the young Penguins into a pesky playoff squad. By 1973 he was back in Toronto, shepherding the next generation of Leafs like Darryl Sittler and Lanny McDonald, teaching them that a crisp breakout pass began long before the puck touched a stick. He preached patience to hot-blooded kids who wanted flashbulbs, explaining that the best defense was sometimes a skate blade pivot executed in silence. Even coaching could not consume his boundless energy. He spent summers organizing minor hockey fundraisers in Simcoe, shook every hand at autograph tables inside Maple Leaf Gardens concourses, and rarely left without purchasing a program for his growing pile of grandchildren. When Clint Malarchuk's horrific throat injury in 1989 racked the league with collective trauma, Kelly quietly supported initiatives to improve medical readiness at rinks, recalling his own era's threadbare trainer kits that consisted of smelling salts and optimism. When former teammate Tim Horton died in a car crash in 1974, Kelly eulogized him not as a star defenseman or coffee shop magnate, but as a father who never refused a pickup game with neighborhood kids. Throughout decades of funerals and banner raisings, his marriage to Andra stood like a lighthouse. She had met him when she was a vivacious Simcoe schoolteacher, and he a shy rookie already nicknamed Red. Together they raised 4 children, Patrick, Maureen, Casey, and Sean, instilling in them the same humility that defined their father. When Patrick attended university interviews, he'd dread the moment an admissions officer recognized his last name, because the legendary parent would appear at alumni events dressed not in bespoke suits, but in the same sensible tweed jacket he'd worn since the 1960s, the cuffs fraying ever so slightly. Old rivalries turned into friendships that spanned golfing foursomes and charity dinners. Glenn Hall, once a granite-jawed opponent, called him every Christmas Eve to trade quips about whose knees ached more. Gilbert Perrault invited him to a Sabres alumni week in Buffalo, and, over chicken wings, confessed he had modeled parts of his swooping centerman style on Kelly's 1960 transformation. Even Maurice Richard, whose ferocity had nearly cracked plate glass in Montreal, softened in retirement. The 2 men, born 8 years apart, sat together at Hall of Fame galas, speaking quietly in English and French about how the game had grown too big, too loud perhaps, but still carried the same heartbeat they loved. While some of hockey's brightest flames flickered out too soon, Brian Spencer gunned down in Florida in 1988. Wade Balak lost to suicide in 2011. Kelly endured into his 90s, mind sharp as a skater's edge. He attended the NHL's centennial celebration in 2017, leaning slightly on a cane, but laughing when the league streamed grainy film of his 1954 Norris acceptance. Gary Bettman handed him a commemorative plaque, and Red quipped, "It's heavier than the cup and twice as pretty." Social media turned the line into a meme, number ultimate winner, trending across platforms younger fans frequented. They Googled him and gasped. 8 rings, 2 positions, 1 man. Honors layered themselves upon his legacy like successive coats of lacquer. Canada's Sports Hall of Fame inducted him in 1977. Ontario followed in 1998, and, at long last, the Maple Leafs raised a number 4 banner in 2016, pairing it with Hap Day's earlier claim. During that ceremony, Ron Ellis, who had battled depression for years, spoke publicly about how Kelly's quiet check-ins, letters, voicemails, the occasional unannounced visit, had tethered him to hope in stormy seasons. It was only then the public realized Red's greatest assists had often come away from any scoreboard. By the time he slipped away in his sleep on May 2nd, 2019, at 91, tributes spooled like ticker tape. Former pupils, political colleagues, and fans too young to recall the 6-team league flooded social feeds with anecdotes. The night Kelly drove 4 hours through a blizzard to sign autographs at a minor hockey jamboree. The day he spotted a child without skates and quietly bought him a pair, lacing them himself. The weekend he tutored a teenage speech contest entrant on confidence because public speaking is just another sheet of ice. The funeral at Toronto's St. Michael's Cathedral drew teammates in vintage-crested blazers, scouts who had once graded him A for heart, and youngsters wearing replica sweaters. Dave Keon, stoic as always, brushed a tear while recalling how Red taught him that courage sometimes means surrendering the puck to a better-positioned friend. In classrooms across Canada, civics teachers cite Kelly when explaining parliamentary service. In sports science seminars, biomechanists analyze the elegant economy of his stride. In psychology journals, researchers explore why athletes who play multiple positions exhibit enhanced cognitive flexibility, citing Kelly-like versatility. Yet, none of those footnotes capture the full measure of the man. It lives instead in grainy clips where number 4 in scarlet Detroit livery sweeps behind his net, head up, or where number 4 in maple leaf blue wins a face-off and immediately backpedals to thwart a rush he alone seems to anticipate. It lives in that improbable Parliament speech about funding playgrounds, delivered on weary legs hours before a playoff game. It lives in a grandson who still keeps Red's battered Norris Trophy in his living room corner, not as museum piece, but as reminder that greatness can be gentle. Hockey history is a tapestry of innovators. Jacques Plante's mask, Bobby Orr's end-to-end rush, Angela James bulldozing a path for women. But Red Kelly stitched an often overlooked thread, the conviction that you could be fierce without being cruel, ambitious without surrendering grace, competitive without forfeiting decency. He embodied contradictions, a defenseman who morphed into a scoring center, a Hall of Famer who toted parliamentary briefing books on road trips, an 8-time champion who never lost the humility of a kid steering a tennis ball through barn cats. In quieter moments, he would credit farm life for grounding him. When you spend dawn milking cattle, no crowd can intimidate you. Yet it was more than chores that shaped him. Perhaps it was an innate curiosity, the same spark that urged him to pivot at 33 and learn a new craft, that prodded him into politics, that kept him attending junior hockey banquets into his late 80s. The numbers: 1,316 games, 823 points, 8 cups, tell only a skeleton story. The flesh and marrow reside in those who felt his guidance. Frank Mahovlich recalling how a mid-game whisper from Kelly transformed anxiety into clarity. Clint Malarchuk praising him for destigmatizing mental scars. Chris Chelios marveling that every Norris he won still seemed to orbit the standard Kelly established in 1954. Even today, when a defenseman contemplates shifting to forward or a winger starts quarterbacking the power play from the blue line, analysts describe the experiment as pulling a red Kelly. Legacies eventually drift into myth, but myths, to survive, require truth at their core. Leonard Patrick Kelly left plenty. Stand by the boards at Scotiabank Arena late on a practice morning, and if the rink falls momentarily silent, you might imagine the faint scrape of skates belonging to a flame-haired defenseman drifting backward, scanning the play. You might remember that he captained championship teams without ever raising his voice in arrogance, that he served constituents as faithfully as teammates, that he believed the purpose of fame was to hold the door a little wider for someone behind you. Listen long enough, and you'll swear the ice answers back, echoing what generations of adversaries and allies came to understand. You can't follow Red Kelly's glow without finding your way to something better.